The mass murder of an innocent family forever shook this quiet town.
How could a Sunday school teacher meticulously slaughter his whole family and then just disappear?
After he killed them all and left, I was always so scared he was going to come back and get me. Isn't that crazy?
Father Wants Us Dead is a podcast that sounds like a horror movie, but it's real. Subscribe now.
I'm Andrew Thien, and this is Beat Check with the Oregonian. We are talking at 10:20 on election night. I am sitting here with Hillary Borrud, my colleague with the Oregonian and Oregon Live. Hillary, thanks so much for joining me after a very long day and a very long election run up here to the primary.
Yeah, of course.
So we just wanted to do a quick table setter because now we know, again, as of Tuesday night, we know that it's going to be a three-person race for governor. And it's going to be Tina Kotek, the Democrat, the former House Speaker, and Christine Dreisig, the former House Minority Leader, and Betsy Johnson, the former Democratic Senator who's running without a party, I guess. So we know all this, Hillary, as of now. Putting on your expert analysis cap, let's start with the Democratic race. I mean, Tina Kotek really won this race quite handily, and that wasn't a sure thing.
Yeah, it was interesting to see those results, a little bit surprising tonight. Tina Kotek had, in preliminary results, which are really preliminary this time because Clackamas County still has a large portion of ballots, especially Democratic ballots, but of Republican and non-affiliated voters as well, uncounted as of tonight because they had a ballot printing error. That means that election workers have to go through and copy a ton of those ballots by hand because they can't scan them in the machines that they usually use. There was a barcode smudging problem or something.
Yeah, not what you want from your third most populous county, or really any county.
Not good at all. Yeah, and you and I both happen to live there, so
yes, we do.
Good chance our ballots are among those. But they're working on going through and methodically getting those votes copied and counted. So that's just the caveat for why we'd say preliminary, especially tonight. But Kotek has a significant lead over Tobias Reed at this point, enough that we and the Associated Press as well have called that race for Kotek this evening. And Tobias Reed had called Kotek and conceded, she told her supporters at her election night party. So that is a clear outcome. They had run a pretty tame race. And some polling that was done by a respected pollster was paid for and released by Tobias Reed, who had a reason to just show that he was within striking distance of Kotek earlier this spring, for his donors, for example, to try and show that he was worth investing in. It showed them about 5 percentage points apart at that point. And so just seeing that she had that commanding lead tonight was a little bit surprising. Her campaign had also put out a memo earlier today that was kind of tempering expectations that people might have, just saying, hey, the results very well might not be clear tonight. And she really had to work hard in this race. It's still kind of a head scratcher looking back then. Now, why they did that, I would be surprised if they were unaware of how things were going.
By they, you mean the former
Kotek's
speaker.
Campaign.
Yeah, I mean, as we've talked about on this podcast, and as you've reported for years now, I mean, this is the longest tenured House Speaker in Oregon history, and she's a progressive champion who had a lot to run on, but it is kind of interesting that was the framing in the days leading up to this primary.
It really is. And Kotek has a variety of, opinions out there that people will voice who have interacted with her in the legislature over the years. She can be, she self-describes herself in And there you can see it's a little bit late at night.
Yeah.
So she describes herself in a campaign ad as tough, and that seems like a pretty fair description, but tough to the point where some of the lawmakers who've worked with her really felt like their arms were twisted too hard on things. But she has championed, like you said, priorities for a lot of left-leaning groups. Public employee unions are huge supporters of Tina Kotek. Mm-hmm. And so, definitely expected them to support her a lot. And they have a history of successfully turning out voters along with some of the other liberal groups that they tend to ally with in elections, like the League of Conservation Voters or Planned Parenthood. So there's probably some factor of that in turnout, but it's still a little surprising how big the lead is.
Yeah, I think that there might be, from people outside of Oregon, a tendency to lump her together with Governor Kate Brown, when they're pretty different people in terms of their leadership style, pretty dramatically so. Obviously different positions as well, coming from the executive branch versus the speaker leading, one of the bodies in the legislature. But Governor Brown has a tendency to convene and delegate, right? And Speaker Kotek, as you've reported and other outlets have as well, she's burned some bridges in how she has carved deals, but she's gotten stuff done.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess depending on who you're talking to, I think there's definitely fair criticism of her. She has had some situations, and it'd be interesting in the fall election, because the parent winner in the Republican race, Christine Dreisig, had squared off against Kotek during a lot of things in the legislature, but last year with redistricting, and they had struck a deal to move things along earlier in 2021 when lawmakers were in session. Kotek then really pretty clearly broke that deal to give Republicans like an outsized say, except for the fact that it was a deal. They're the minority.
Right. She
gave them equal say on a committee that would have passed out any redistricting plans from the House. And then Kotek, when it was clear that Republicans were not going to pass out plans that Democrats wanted, she just changed the composition of the committee. But, in a sense, I would say that Kotek, going back to how she's tough, Kate Brown was pretty well liked in the legislature. She had a reputation for being able to charm people. Mm-hmm. But then we see her being the nation's most unpopular governor at this point. And, that willingness or ability when you're a lawmaker to charm other people and get them over to your side, or have those kinds of skills, maybe didn't translate the same in a governor. So that would be interesting with Kotek to see how that would go. I would say that she is, some people criticize Kate Brown for her failure to use her position to communicate with Oregonians and to get out messages that would allow her to be an effective governor. So far, what I've seen with Tina Kotek over the years, she seems to be pretty straightforward and confident with her messaging. So it'll be interesting to see how she handles that in the months going forward. Yeah,
Governor Brown obviously is term limited out, and you mentioned the charming piece. That's hard to do in the national and local climate in terms of working with the other side of the aisle has been pretty challenging, to say the least, in the last, last 4 or 5, 6 years. But let's stick with Christine Dreisig, because, a lot of Oregonians are going to learn more about her now. But like you said, she's not new to this scene at all. And she defeated a very crowded field that included the nominee in 2020. Not 20, did I screw that up? 2018? The nominee in 2018. So how did she get this done from your perspective?
Well, and just I should note that with Christine Dreisig, we're saying she's the apparent winner of the Republican primary for governor at this point. Still waiting to see some more results, especially with Clackamas County. But she's got about a 4 percentage point lead over Bob Tiernan, a former state lawmaker from the 1990s, and he's a corporate consultant and lawyer. Who lives some portion of the time in California, but enough in Oregon to run for governor. How did Dreisig pull it off? I mean, she's at this point got around 24% of the vote in the Republican primary. So that's a highly split primary nomination vote. The lowest that we've seen in recent decades, I think, was in the 30s, because typically you wouldn't have 19 Republicans running for Oregon governor like this year. I think there's about 15 in the Democratic race, but it was just nowhere near as competitive in the Democratic race. It was really just State Treasurer Tobias Reed and Tina Kotek. So Dreisig, I think she was to some degree the Republican sort of establishment candidate at this time. You know, Bud Pierce, like you mentioned, he was the 2016 Republican nominee for governor. But that was sort of a challenging year for Republicans. And he stepped forward because Kate Brown was running for the first time for Oregon governor after she had just been basically bumped into the position by John Kitzhaber stepping down, and
amid the
she hadn't been in office long enough to have people have maybe such strong opinions on her. So Bud Pierce this time, you know, he spent a lot of money on his campaign. A lot of it was self-funding because he's an oncologist with some personal wealth that he could spend. But it just was not as aggressive of a campaign, I think. And Dreisig ended up dumping a ton of money into TV advertising, which interestingly was what Bob Tiernan, this 1990s lawmaker, did as well. He spent a ton of money on TV, and I'm running out.
Yeah, it didn't appear to move the needle, and maybe some of the reporting, you know, in terms of where he spends his time, who knows, maybe that moved the needle a bit in the late run up here on the election. I guess you never know, but I think that Dreisig did have more of a presence in Oregon, getting out and around the state and getting her message out. And she does have some real connections to other Republicans who are in elected positions in the legislature. She'd been there and participated in the walkout in the State House in 2020. That was over cap and trade, greenhouse gas cap and trade bill. It was one that actually, interestingly, the House Republicans didn't even need to do to kill that bill. The walkouts otherwise had just been on the Senate side in 2019 and 2020. Yeah.
And that was where the bill was in 2020. So it was really just sending more of a political message, you know, to have her caucus do that protest walkout of the Capitol. But I think that she has a number of fans in the Republican caucus. Probably the strength of their support varies by person, but a number of strong supporters there that are from counties around the state and could kind of introduce her to their constituents. Beyond that, who knows?
Yeah. So let's pivot ahead, I guess, to the general election. You know, I've said at the outset that it's going to be a 3-person race, and they're, you know, the main 3 candidates are all accomplished lawmakers who are all women, and Betsy Johnson. They all kind of know each other too, obviously, because they've been in leadership or influence for a long time. I don't know, what are you interested in as we move snap judgments here towards this you know, what's going to be a pretty interesting race and something we haven't seen in Oregon with a well-heeled and well-known unaffiliated candidate.
Well, one thing that I keep thinking about that's going to be noteworthy, or something really to watch in this election, we will likely have 3 former state lawmakers, 3 people who were recently, just months ago, in the state legislature. So if we talk about one of the top concerns that Oregon voters have listed in polling this spring is political leadership.
Yeah.
If you want things done differently, if you want things, if you think that something was mismanaged, how much is that going to get discussed in this campaign? There's just, I don't see a ton there for these 3 candidates to gain from going negative on each other. Now, maybe that could be different.
Yeah.
I guess each of them would have different things to critique about each other's record. But the fact is, lawmakers vote together on a ton of bills. They vote together on budget bills all the time. Betsy Johnson voted with Republicans on some of these things, and with Tina Kotek on other things. So some of the things that just have to do with how well Oregon is running. So take unemployment insurance. That was something that thousands of Oregonians dealt with the state's ineptitude, and just the fact that state leaders had let this problem just sit there, that we needed a new unemployment system overhaul for about a decade or so, doing nothing despite having federal money. Betsy Johnson was there during that time. Tina Kotek was there during that time. I suppose Christine Dreisig gets a pass on that because she wasn't elected until, I believe it was 2018. So by then the state had actually started working on this tech overhaul project. So, is Betsy Johnson really going to want to challenge Tina Kotek on that?
Yeah. It's going to be pretty interesting to see where the fault lines and fissures and attack lines happen. I think of, I could see that environment playing a role here, where you talked about the walkout and Christine Dreisig, her part in that. And then Betsy Johnson has been allied with Timber Unity. That could be the environment could potentially be a big, issue that the former speaker uses to her advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a clear one where she could attack them, and you would have a lot of voters in Oregon, Democrats and some portion of non-affiliated voters, who would be concerned about what would happen with state environmental protections if either Betsy Johnson or Christine Dreisig were the next governor. And as far as there being 3 women running, I think that these are 3 women who have strong personalities. They are articulate, and I think it'll just be an exciting race to cover in the upcoming months. Just to see them play off of each other, and it'll be a different dynamic than if you had a male candidate in the race, then you just might be thinking about gender a little bit differently. And perhaps this will put a bit more of the focus on the different personalities, the different approaches, because that's not going to be as much of an issue. Yeah. Now, abortion, I think it'll come up, even though Oregon has that pretty firmly embedded in our law, and the governor has limited latitude on that. But I just expect it will be something they talk about a lot. Yeah,
and just on the fact that they're all women, obviously the governor now is a woman, and the Secretary of State is a woman, and we've had female governors in the state, and obviously the speaker who just left her position. So I guess I just brought it up, as the fact that it's interesting they have a 3-person race to begin with.
Yeah. And to be honest, someone's mentioned that to me, that I don't know whether that we would be the first state in the nation to have, having a 3-way serious unaffiliated candidate race for governor. That's pretty unique on its own. And so then the idea that there would be 3 women running, we may or may not be unprecedented in that. assuming Dreisig pulls it off.
And one of the former female governors, Barbara Roberts, endorsed Tobias Reed in the Democratic primary. So, right? I got that right, didn't I?
Oh, yeah.
I think it did. So that was interesting. All right. Just before we're all punchy here, anything else you'd want to say before we go? But appreciate you carving out some time.
Yeah, sure.
Anything else? We're good? Okay. Subscribe to Beat Check anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll have more analysis and touch base on these issues and these races as we go forward. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Andrew.